Time. Are you all ready to roll?
We're ready.
All right, here we go. Welcome to the smartest people in the room. We are so glad you are here with us, and just by showing up today, you are already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am pleased to feature two rock star executives who, among many accolades, have dedicated their careers to helping improve the music industry opportunities for copyright holders and songwriters. I promise you will leave today a lot smarter and more inspired than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And please ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the interview. And above all, please make sure your chat is set to address speakers and attendees. In other words, everyone, not just us. I want to thank our sponsors for without their support, we could not keep this free. Thank you so much to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, Project Music, and Cushmaster's brand of CBD products. I also want to mention a new sponsor to our lineup, MedJet. MedJet is the top-rated medical transport and travel security program for people who travel extensively. More on that later as well. So let's get down to business. If you've been paying attention to this series, you're used to me introducing our speakers by reading their bios verbatim. Today, I'm going to depart from that pattern for two reasons. Number one, these two guys need no real introduction if you make your living in the music industry. For the past 20 or so years, these two superheroes have collaborated to defend the rights of songwriters and publishers to protect and exploit their copyrighted material to its fullest. It's been a long, hard fight, but these guys have gotten it done and hopefully will continue to do so. So here is how I want to introduce them. David Israelite is the head of the Nmpa. Bart Herbison is the head of the NSAI. They both carry big and well-deserved titles. Those titles describe what they do, but I want to point out a different title for both of them that underscores who they are, and that is these guys are songmen, the ultimate songmen. And that is one of the greatest compliments I can pay to them. And for anyone who understands what that means in music, especially in Nashville, that is a term of highest respect and deepest admiration. These two guys are the ultimate songmen, and every publisher, songwriter, and copyright owner out there listening today owes them a huge thank you the next time you see them. With that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bart Herbison and David Israelite to the smartest people in the room. Please take it away, Bart.
Wow, Tom, thank you. And by the way, product endorsement, you sent me the package from Cushmasters, and I've got some serious arthritis here. Dude, it's gone. Just saying. I thought I'd start with a commercial for you. So thank you for that.
I can get some more for you.
Well, I would need it. But look, I'm going to start with just some fun questions with David. After I say, we've both been privileged to be in a lot of rooms with a lot of smart people. This is the smartest man I've ever been in any room with. So y'all welcome David Israelite. Little claps there. David, your favorite band?
Boston.
Okay. Your favorite solo act?
That's a tough one. You didn't give me these questions in advance.
No, if you need to pick two or three, the next one's going to be the hardest, probably of the entire day. But favorite solo, you can pick more than one.
Favorite solo act. I mean, I guess I would probably pick Garth Brooks.
Okay. we do job interviews, and we're the Nashville Songwriters Association. And it's crazy how this next question just throws people into a tizzy and changes the tone of the interview. What's your favorite song? One song, Desert Island, or you get none. Favorite song of all time?
More Than a Feeling by Boston.
Well, there you go. So you got to get Tom Schultz. Isn't that the guy's name? We got to get him on here.
That's right.
Favorite country
that's
song?
a close one too. I would put Hallelujah, of the many different versions, and there are a lot of really great ones by Leonard Cohen that would be up there as well. But I would pick, it's really, I think, about memories from your childhood and your kind of formative ages, but I would pick More Than a Feeling by Boston.
Favorite country song of all time?
Country song of all time? Wow. That's a really tough one for me.
Well, maybe I'll lead you into that. You've got a different backdrop here behind you. I'm going to ask you about in a minute, but a week ago, it was a painting you painted of Taylor Swift.
Yeah, we had a staff retreat, and one of the things that someone on my team found was a company that if you tell them the names of artists, they will give you a paint by numbers canvas. And so we had a little party, and we each painted some of our favorite songwriters, and I got Taylor Swift. I actually have it. I didn't.
No, let's see this. It's impressive, actually.
But I will hold it up. That it's
right.
You know, it's more impressive than it actually is because, again, it was paint by numbers.
Sure.
And the favorite country song one is tougher for me because even though I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, where country kind of dominated the music scene, I wasn't really a country fan until later in life. And so a lot of my favorite country songs are more recent from when I started becoming a fan as opposed to when I was growing up. But I did, I guess I might even pick The Dance by Garth Brooks. It was one of the songs that when I was younger, my band used to play and always spoke to me and still does.
Well, in my office, and that's a solo, right? The great Tony Arata. Tony didn't get a lot of cuts, but he wrote them by himself, owned part of the publishing, and they were all gigantic hit singles.
Yeah.
He hand wrote the lyrics out for me, David, and I think I owe you personally. You're going to get one of those from Tony Arata. You're going to get a handwritten copy of The Dance, and I will see that happens to you.
Well, that'll be treasured. It'll go right next to my Don Schlitz, The Gambler lyrics that he wrote out for me that I hang up in my poker room.
I don't have that. You tell Don I want one of those, and we'll trade.
All right? We'll trade.
By the way, have you seen that? I knew there was The Gambler and then like another one. They've been showing them on some Western channel. I watched there's the Gambler Marathon. There's like 7 in a row, and Brady Hawks, after about 3 Gambler movies, I have to take a break. But your coolest music experience while at Nmpa?
While at Nmpa. There are a lot of ones that would rank up with that. You know, I have the honor of serving on the board of the Songwriter Hall of Fame. And so those events are always very special. We also do our own annual meeting where we honor writers, and we've honored some fantastic icons. And so it's hard to pick one of those that would be the most special, but I guess I'll pick Steven Tyler, who joined the board of my charitable foundation, the Songs Foundation, came to Washington and agreed to walk the halls of Congress with me. And then we hosted a concert on the rooftop of the building right across from the Capitol, and had a bunch of members of Congress and their staffs come over, and he performed kind of an acoustic show for that crowd. And so I think that day probably would rank up as number 1 for me. Walking next to him through the halls of Congress as people poured out of their offices because they heard Steven Tyler. It's probably the closest I'll ever get to understanding what it feels like to be around. And
by the way, he's from Boston. He's not that band, but I remember this, David. You were very kind to invite an up-and-coming songwriter artist named Mindy Brosh, who he called up to the piano, and they actually got to sing a song together. But about 3:30, Tom, I walk in and David's like, I'm like, what's wrong? And he goes, we got to get a different grand piano up here. And I told David, welcome to the logistics of shows. And you got it up some kind of elevator just in
Well,
time for the show to go on.
I don't want to make Steven sound like he's difficult, because he's not. He's one of the
Right.
kindest, most wonderful human beings.
And we
I've
got
ever
him because
met.
of his a lawyer, and I want to give props to the great songwriter advocate Dina LaPoltz. How that all
Yeah,
happened.
but he had a particular type of piano that he insisted on playing, and we found one, and so we were happy. And then very late in the process, we learned that ours wasn't the right color, and so we had to find the one in white, and we found it. It was in, I think, New York, and we had to have it like overnighted on a truck to get here just in time to have that right piano, and it was worth it because it was a special night.
Let's get into a little of your background. You were in bands.
Very young. I was in bands in kind of the junior high, early high school days. Yeah.
I don't know if you know this. We have a game at NSAI. We rank band names. And a lot of the kids that we meet, they give their duo name or their band name, and I go, that can't be your name. They think it's cute, but I went, you're not, no. So it all started when we stay at the La Park Suites Hotel when we're in LA, and we come down that, and we have to take a left on Melrose out of there. You're taking your life in your hands. So our first band name that we liked was Left on Melrose. That's for a pop kind of band. What was some of your band names, David?
The first band name was called Illusion. And
not bad, not bad.
To,
are y'all kind of poppy, or what are you, kind of pop stuff or rock? What are you playing?
It was a lot of rock. It was more rock focused, I'd say.
Okay.
Illusion, that was probably 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade time frame. And then as all bands do, it transformed a little bit, and we became Speed Limit.
Okay. Illusion, yeah.
Yeah, neither one was particularly good. And I was not a very good guitar player. I loved playing guitar, but I was not very good, and I was a worse singer. So I used to turn my microphone down so that I could pretend I was singing, but no one could actually hear it. So it was, I gave that up, the idea that I would actually be in the music business as a performer pretty early in life.
Well, we're going to get you up next year at a Tin Pan South show with Tony Arata. You're going to accompany him on the dance. And I'm not joking about that. We'll work that out. That'll be a fantastic moment. So you did a great podcast. I don't want people to think I'm plagiarizing with our friend, former Congressman Doug Collins, who was really chiefly responsible, along with a few others, for the Music Modernization Act. I loved a line in there. Let's go back to your roots growing up, and we're going to take that all the way to your political path. You described yourself as the little geeky kid with the briefcase in school. You knew back then, for real?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite TV shows was Family Ties, and there was a character, Alex P. Keaton, and that was my nickname, actually.
Really? You should have told me this, David. You should not have told me this.
My parents, who are the most wonderful people in the world, but they were kind of hippies, and I grew up, got into debate, and thought I was a very early, kind of Reagan Republican, and carried a briefcase around and kind of modeled myself on Alex Keaton. So, yeah.
But did you know you wanted to be in public policy that early?
I think so. Yeah, definitely high school. I knew I was going to go to law school by the time I was a freshman in high school. And I knew that I loved politics. And I started volunteering for a senator from Missouri named Jack Danforth in his Kansas City office, where I was from, and really fell in love with that whole idea. And then during college, took a semester and came to Washington, which was my first exposure, and interned for another Missouri senator named Kit Bond. And that was kind of, early on, I knew that was probably a career path for me.
So you go to law school. After that, you go to the Hill. Kind of trace that for a moment, because you ended up in some really important jobs, David.
Well, I started law school in Missouri at the University of Missouri. And then after my first year, that senator that I interned for, Kit Bond, was up for a re-election cycle. And I had an opportunity to come back to Washington and work for him. And I basically worked in the Senate during the day. And then I did my second year at night at Georgetown Law School, and then took a semester off of law school to help run his campaign for re-election. And then when that was done, went back, finished law school, practiced for just 3 years at a big law firm in the litigation department. And then that same senator asked me to come back to basically run his office, his operation. And I left the practice of law and came to do that. He was considered the most vulnerable senator in the country and ended up winning pretty easily. And during that campaign, this is back in 1998, I got to be pretty close with the governor of Texas, who was also running for re-election at that time, George Bush. And after the 98 campaign, had an opportunity to go work on that 2000 presidential campaign. And that's what I did.
You end up working for the Attorney General. Tell us about that. And I really just want you to take some time and spend some time on what happened with you at 9/11. You find yourself in a very important place, even on the plane, in a critical time for our nation.
Sure. So when I was Senator Kit Bond's chief of staff in the Senate, the other Missouri senator was John Ashcroft. And after the 2000 presidential election, John Ashcroft lost his reelection to the Senate to a dead governor. And for anyone that remembers this story, he was running against the Missouri governor who died in a plane crash. And the dead governor's name remained on the ballot. And that dead governor won the election. And so Senator Ashcroft was out of the Senate. And then President Bush asked him to become the Attorney General. And I was close with him from our time from Missouri and in the Senate. And he asked me to come with him to the Justice Department, which was not my career plan, but it was an amazing opportunity to go work by the side of the new Attorney General. And so I did that. Had a pretty tough confirmation hearing for anyone that remembers that time period. Got through that. And my plan was to be there about a year, kind of get him set up and then go back to my normal life. And pretty quickly after we got in place, 9/11 happened. And so that changed the trajectory really of my whole career. But on the day of 9/11, I was with the Attorney General in a small plane. We had flown, as all the cabinet secretaries were doing that day, they were going on a reading initiative. The president had this reading initiative. And for anyone that remembers the scene of President Bush reading to school kids, and that's when he was told by his chief of staff, Andy Card, about the planes hitting the towers. All the cabinet secretaries had been sent out that day around the country to go read to school kids as part of this kind of coordinated initiative. And so we were flying up to Minneapolis, and we were just about to land when we learned about the first attack. And so we landed that plane, and the Attorney General basically ordered us to go back in the air and head back to Washington. Well, there was an order from the FAA, no planes were to take off, understandably. Well, we fueled up the plane, we took off anyway. About 3 different times on the way back to Washington, we were told, you got to land because no planes are to be in the air. And we just kept going. We finally got to the outskirt of DC, and pilot turns around and says, look, there's a shoot down order around DC. We can't enter this airspace. And so we eventually made contact, and they send out an F-18 fighter to escort us into Washington. So I have these pictures out the window of this small little plane with an F-18 side by side taking us down. We flew over the Pentagon, which had just been hit. And we learned as we were doing that our Solicitor General, a good friend of mine, Ted Olson, his wife was on that plane that hit the Pentagon. And so we were flying over the smoking Pentagon, landed, the last plane to land in Washington, and then immediately went to the FBI, which was across the street from where the Justice Department is. And I basically lived there for several months, while the early days of 9/11 and post 9/11 and what we did. And so that was a very intense formative time in my career. And I was really an impactful day. I'll never forget that day. And then also the many months after it and kind of what played out after that. And so it was a real honor to work for John Ashcroft as Attorney General and to be there at that time. But it definitely changed my career path.
Well, by the way, Eldred versus Ashcroft, that was upheld by the Supreme Court to keep the life plus 70-year ownership of the copyrights, which we played a role in because we found references to that in Madison's diaries. I'm going to ask a question to you, Tom. I know we don't normally do that, but it segues into this. Who was Warren Wasp?
Warren Wasp is one of my heroes. I was fortunate to be Robin to his Batman for a few moments in time. He's probably the most decorated headhunter in the music industry ever. And David and he have some history. I'll leave it at
Well,
that.
that's the question. How did you get the job at Nmpa? I don't even think you knew what it was.
So anyway, as I said, I went to DOJ thinking I'd be there for a year. After 9/11, I was not leaving. There wasn't a chance I was going to depart while the people that, I felt like I was kind of in the bunker with were still there working. And so I stayed at DOJ for the entire 4 years that John Ashcroft was Attorney General. But toward the end, it was quite clear that, anti-terrorism wasn't my career path. It wasn't what I intended to do. It just was dominating my time. One of my best friends was a guy that I had worked with in the Senate, worked with on the 2000 presidential campaign. He became the head of the RIAA, Mitch Bainwall. And this was right in the very worst days of the Napster era. And so I was watching one of my best friends and what he was dealing with from the RIAA in terms of combating the theft of music. And I just had this idea. And so I went into the Attorney General's office and asked whether he would set up a task force to take a look at intellectual property and what the government could do to better protect intellectual property. And not only did he agree to set up the task force, he asked if I would chair it. And so I spent kind of moonlighting from my day job as being his deputy chief of staff and chief counselor to running this task force on intellectual property, and got into all of the issues involving the government's protection of IP, music obviously being kind of at the front of the line based on what was going on. And so that was a real interest to me. I loved music. I loved the concept. I did a little bit of that when I was a practicing attorney. And so I really embraced this kind of side job of chairing this task force on intellectual property. And it was about time to leave. We knew that at the midterm election in 2004 that we were going to leave, and then I was going to then move on. And now my kind of career plan had been a little bit scrambled by the last 4 years. And I got a call from a headhunter who I didn't know from New York named Warren Wasp. And he said that he wanted to talk to me about this job of the CEO of Nmpa, which I did not know what that was. At that time, they had no presence in Washington, D.C. They were a New York-based organization. They had lobbyists that they hired in Washington. And I was such an arrogant little jerk that I told him I had no interest in talking to him about that. I had many other things I was looking at, and that was not worthy of my time to meet with him. And if he had not been such a kind, generous, understanding person, that would have been the end of it, and I never would have understood what I passed up. And thankfully, he was more persistent than that and said, well, let me tell you a little bit more about it. Let me, buy you a coffee and explain it a little bit more. And the more he told me about it, the more I realized I didn't know everything about this world. And I became really interested by the end of our conversations. And that's how I ended up at Nmpa.
And I think you had some conditions, not for you, but in order for the trade association to achieve success in the future. Is that accurate?
I did. So one of the great things that I was exposed to is that there's a lawyer in Washington named Bob Barnett, who's a very famous attorney because he basically represents almost every former president, former vice president, former secretary of state. And he was handling the former attorney general's book deal, speaking tour, things like that. And I was the one dealing with him. And so when I was looking for myself, I asked him as a favor, could he lower himself and take a look at what I was looking at? And he graciously did that. And we came up with a list of kind of requests of things about the job that would make it more interesting to me. And so we submitted this list. The chairman of the board was and still is one of the greatest human beings I've ever known, Erwin Robinson.
Yeah.
And this Uber lawyer, Bob Barnett, calls me back and says, they said yes. I'm like, said yes to what? He said, your list. Like, your list. And so, yeah, it involved moving the headquarters to Washington, D.C. Basically, even though it was almost 100 years old at that time, I wanted to restart it. I thought it needed a kind of a remake. It was kind of like a amazing mansion that had the right bones, but you had to kind of rebuild it. So we moved it to Washington, D.C. I hired an entire new staff. We started a political action committee, and they had the same vision that I did, the board did. A lot of really visionary music publishers like Marty Bandier and Ralph Peer that were involved at that time. And they bought into this vision of what NMPA should be. And so really it was quite easy to kind of get them to agree to this list.
I compliment you, and I will do that several times today. We sat down shortly after that, and I don't know if I've ever told you this, David. The problems are insurmountable. We've been working on some of these for 50 years when you came along, or 45, and everybody said, "What'd you think?" And I went, there's a light at the end of this tunnel. And I thank you, because you had a vision and you had resources. And let's take a quick moment to recognize your staff, because same thing with folks on my staff. They deserve a hell of a lot of credit for a lot of things that are going on right now. Good things.
Yeah, I have an amazing staff. We've put together a team that involves mostly people that didn't work in the music industry before, which is not uncommon since we're in Washington and we're a trade association.
Right.
And so many of them had a similar experience to me, which is they had to learn music publishing, songwriting business in their jobs. But we have an all-star team. Our general counsel, Danielle Aguirre, came from a big law firm, had a little bit of exposure to music publishing in her practice, but not a lot. And we've now built a legal team where, we have a team of, I guess it would be 6 attorneys that, are just world beaters. And it's really fun to watch. The same thing with regard to our legislative team, with regard to kind of our external affairs and public relations team. Really could not be more proud of the team we have here at NMPA.
We're going to take some questions later. People can start populating those in the chat room. It's going to be a little while, but you got a great shout out from Terry Nelson Carpenter, who's the national president of AIMP, representing the independent music publishers, who compliments you and your staff. And I think we all second that. The Music Modernization Act. We started elements of that back in 2003. When did you think, David, it might actually be something we could pass?
Yeah, well, part of coming into this job without a background in music publishing, I felt like I knew a lot of things about law, about Washington, about maybe record labels even from my time on this task force. I knew nothing about music publishing. And I was asked to testify about 3 weeks after I started on a hearing on Section 115. Congress was having this hearing, it was pre-scheduled. I now am in the job, and there wasn't a chance I was going to pass up the opportunity to introduce myself in this new role. So I had to learn what Section 115 was and what the history was of licensing for this hearing. And it became apparent without having any of the baggage of having grown up in the industry. I didn't do business in the industry. So I was looking at this with fresh eyes. And I'm learning about how licensing works of our rights. And it's just insane. It makes no sense. It's kind of this historical anomaly of one layer on top of another.
We call it the onion. We call it the onion because
Sure.
That's what it is.
Sure. And so it became apparent very early that this was a broken system. Broken for a couple of reasons. One, just for the fact that we were having the government set our prices. That was something that I never could accept as being legitimate and something that would continue. But when you get beyond that, then the process by which the licensing and the payments work was broken too. And so we started talking with the Digital Media Association, which had a whole different group of members back then than they do now.
Right.
But about this problem of Section 115 and licensing. And from the very early conversations, we talked about trying to make it work better. If you were going to have a compulsory license, making it work better. And so we had early bills that we called CIRA. That was a congressional name of a bill. Worked on it for a while, didn't pass. We tried it again a second time, didn't pass. And quite honestly, a lot of the complication was back then, so much of the money was still flowing through record labels to music publishers, because you had this blend of kind of the old world of physical product, where labels were the ones that would license, collect, pay, and now these new digital players. It really took a couple of things to happen before we had a chance. One was that the amount of money that was in play had to grow, because now it mattered to people. Back in early days, it was more theoretical. It was now a really big problem. And then secondly, while labels and publishers had lots of tensions, they worked together because they kind of came up in the same industry. And so there was understanding, and there were arrangements, and there were allowances. So the broken system worked because it was between two parts of the music industry. When the digital companies came in, not having that connection, understanding, practice, the broken system led to a lot of litigation and lawsuits and problems that necessitated a change. And that was really the window we found ourselves in, back 2017. And that's when I thought we could actually get this done. But you and I had very early conversations, and we had the same vision that there was only one way to do this. And I think it was proven to be right. It had to be a consensus bill, which meant we were not going to pass a bill over the objections of any one of the different groups that mattered. And that included record labels, broadcasters, digital companies, songwriter groups, publisher groups. Everyone had to agree.
Performing rights societies. And just a quick insertion, David, I don't think people realize that we have lots of other visions, but we've got to navigate everybody that represents songwriters and then artists on the record label side. And that's often the hardest part.
Yeah, but if you start from the premise that it has to be a consensus bill, that means that you have to tell every one of those parties that something they want can't be in the bill. And a lot of people, quite honestly, just don't have the right perspective to understand that. They can't step out of their own shoes and see the bigger picture about what was or wasn't possible. And I think for those of us that were kind of in on the ground floor and the architects of the MMA, we understood that. And so it was an exercise of making the bill the right balance of give and take, where everyone came away with something they wanted and no one objected to the total package. And then the other thing was, it was basically a trade. I mean, the Music Modernization Act is a giant bill. It has lots of things in it, but it is not unfair to boil it down to this. We solved the problem of litigation against streaming companies in exchange for a list of things. That was the bill. Everything else about it was added on. But without that trade, the bill wouldn't have happened. I think we've lost your volume, Bart. Am I the only one that can't hear Bart right now?
Bart, you're muted.
Whatever you were doing with your speaker wire there, Bart, may have affected your volume. You're now muted too.
We lost you, Bart. Try that again. Come in, Bart.
Tom, I'm going to start asking you questions.
Bart, we got nothing.
No, you're not muted, Bart, but we have no volume for you.
Any lip readers in the house? Bart, why don't you log out and try to log back on? David, let me take the microphone and ask you
Sure.
one of my favorite questions. Bart alluded to this a moment ago. I'm going to steal some of his thunder. You mentioned something about having a poker room. I want to hear a little bit about you and your poker.
Well, I'm an avid amateur poker player. It's a hobby, but I learned as a little kid from my grandfather, and played during law school and beyond, and it turned into kind of a weekly gathering of a group that became really good friends. And COVID has changed the in-person nature of that group, but it still is something that I enjoy doing as a hobby.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Well,
Yeah.
we got you. Welcome back, brother.
Well, the question I was going to ask, David, and you can spend some time explaining this. The Music Modernization Act is not the bill we would have written. We we did something incredible. It passed through both judiciary committees, and those are the most politicized committees in the world. That's the email servers, the Benghazi, it's everything on both sides. And then it was unanimous, and it was unanimous in the House and the Senate. What bill would you have written, David, and why couldn't we do that?
Sure. I actually, and I talked about this at the time, that if I had my way, the bill would have been very, very short, and it would have been two parts. Part one, eliminate Section 115 of the Copyright Act. That is the section that imposes a compulsory license on songwriters and publishers. With the elimination of that, songwriters and publishers would be in the same place in a marketplace that record labels and artists are with these streaming companies. They would get to negotiate their rights. They'd have the power to say no. So I would have eliminated Section 115. The justification for Section 115 was based on a 1909 analysis of player piano rolls. The idea that companies like Google, Apple, Amazon needed antitrust protection against the publishers is preposterous. The second thing I would have done is eliminate the consent decrees that govern ASCAP and BMI by statute. Those consent decrees were put in place in 1941, based also on a historically untenable premise that the fledgling broadcast industry needed protection against the songwriters. That's outdated. And if the Justice Department won't eliminate those consent decrees, then by statute, I would have had Congress do that. So those are the two simple sentences. Eliminate Section 115, sunset or eliminate the consent decrees that govern ASCAP and BMI, and that would have been my bill.
Get us out of government control, put us in the free market, and we're not done trying to do that yet. I'm going to shift gears, ask some fun personal questions. This next one, your answer cannot be poker. We're going to get into that later. If you were not, tell us a couple things people don't know about you.
The people don't know about me. Well, I guess I would say that when I'm not working, in order of priority, first and foremost, I have an amazing family. I have two little girls, 8 and 5 years old. Maya Reagan Israelite and Eliana Lincoln Israelite. As you can tell, I got the middle names. My wife got the first names. And so I just enjoy spending every minute I can with them. So that would be number one. When
Are they carrying little briefcases around yet? Just
no, like I was different than my parents. I expect they'll be different than theirs, and that's okay. Beyond that, I would say that I really enjoy fitness, working out, eating healthy, cooking a lot of my own food for that purpose. I lift weights. I play a lot of golf, which is a very important part of my kind of recreational life. And then obviously poker, which is more well-known maybe. Working out, golf, and poker would be the three things that I'm spending a lot of time doing when I'm not working or with my family.
Some quick hits. Your favorite cocktail?
Favorite cocktail?
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty boring. I pretty much drink whiskey straight up, as opposed to a more complicated cocktail.
Ice or room temperature?
I generally will use ice, although I'm fine with it being neat also. And I do favor bourbons probably more than anything else, although I've kind of gotten into some of the Japanese whiskeys more recently. But so, yeah, that would be my favorite drink.
Favorite food?
Favorite food? Well, as I mentioned, I try to eat healthy, but that doesn't mean that's what I would like to eat if I could. My mother is Italian, and so I would probably put Italian cuisine at the top of the list in terms of favorite foods and you can do healthy Italian, but it's just not as good.
Favorite book?
Favorite book. I remember a couple of books that had a big influence on me. One of them would be La Morte de Arthur, which was the story of King Arthur and the Round Table, which was a book I read growing up that kind of was impactful, and always enjoyed kind of going back to that book. I like both fiction and nonfiction books. And so I used to read a lot of political books. And believe it or not, I guess we're doing an honest interview, not one that's packaged to look good. I really enjoyed a lot of the books that Richard Nixon wrote. He was, for whatever his flaws were, and there were many, he was a rather insightful author, especially about world events.
Favorite movie?
Rocky II. which is not most people's favorite Rocky movie,
It's
but I would
mine. It's my
I would
favorite.
put that and The Godfather as kind of the top two movies for me.
Favorite TV show.
Favorite TV show of all time. I think of those in genres. And so, I mean, for comedy, I probably would put Seinfeld at the top of my list. For more drama, I'd probably put The Wire at the top of my list.
Okay.
And then if I had to choose between the two, I guess I'd pick The Wire because it was just more impactful to me.
We both are watching Billions. Which character are you on Billions? I think too.
You know, my wife quit Billions because she said there's no one on this show I can root for. She's of the opinion that if there's not a good actor, and they're all bad actors, kind of like Succession is another show like that, she doesn't want to watch it. So I guess if I compared myself to any of the Billions actors, it would be someone that's not very well liked. So hard to say. I guess between though the Chuck Rhodes character and the Axe character, I definitely relate more to the Axe character, even though you think I would go with the U.S. attorney.
Well, I think you're a combination of both. And I say that complimentary because it's the nature of what we do. There's elements of both of those things. And we'll get back into some more substantive stuff. But if you're not at Nmpa, you're not a lawyer, you're not in the political realm, what are you doing?
I think that I probably would have done something that was related to what I did growing up with debate. For better or for worse, I was just better at debate than I was at anything else in life. And so I had a real honor of, you know, getting to put myself through college on debate scholarships, getting the honor that was the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy for college debate my senior year of college. So that just to me was what I was good at. And so if I wasn't going to be a lawyer, maybe something involving television or the opportunity to kind of be in that same kind of give and take capacity that would feel like debate would probably what I would be best at.
What is a CRB?
Well, we talked about Section 115 and the fact that our prices are set by the government. The CRB is the body, the Copyright Royalty Board, that actually sets those prices. So not to get into a long history of this, but in 1909, Congress decided by law that publishers would have to license their copyrights for player panorils, and they set the price by statute. And that law basically stayed in place for about 70 years. And then Congress finally said, well, we've got to come up with a system to adjust the price because obviously you can't just have it static and set by law. And so they went through a couple of different iterations. They had something called a Copyright Royalty Tribunal, and then they had something called the Copyright Arbitration Royalty Panel. And then they finally settled on this newest iteration called the Copyright Royalty Board. It's made up of 3 judges. They're hired by the Librarian of Congress. They each have a spec. One has to be an administrative law expert, one has to be an economist, one has to be a copyright law expert. And while they sit in judgment of multiple different rates, the one that is the most important is the rate they set for songwriters on what digital streaming services pay them. And so the CRB is this 3-judge panel that meets basically 2 out of every 5 years. We're in that trial. So they set rates for a 5-year period, but it takes 2 years to get that decision. So it's kind of 2 years in a trial process, a decision, 3 years off, then you go back to the trial process again. That's all assuming, of course, you're not in an appeal of the decision, which of course we're still in right now.
Let me lead you to that. We had CRB3. What was the outcome and where are we and why are we still in it?
Sure. So CRB3 was the trial that was going to set the rates for the time period of 2018 through 2022. So that means we started the process in 2016. We had a trial in 2017. And then in January of 2018, they announced their decision for what the rates would be for 5 years. And they actually put it out during the Grammys. We were kind of all together during Grammy week. And this decision came out. And it was a huge victory for songwriters and music publishers. It was I'm simplifying it because it's a very complicated formula, but it was a 44% increase in rates, the first meaningful rate increase for
By the way, the
songwriters.
largest digital rate increase in history. Congratulations.
Yeah, and so it was a night to celebrate. We got not exactly what we asked for, but we got a really good result. And unfortunately, that decision from January of 2018, we now have a hearing on March 7th, so coming up in a few weeks, that is still about resolving the rates that were set in January of 2018. So here we are more than 4 years later, and we are still litigating what the rates have been. It's a very frustrating process. It's part of the reason it's broken, and we still don't know.
I don't know that we would be where we are in CRB4 had we known the outcome of CRB3.
Yeah, and so while we continue to fight over that decision from January of 2018, we are getting ready to start the trial for the next 5-year period. And it's very likely we're going to go to trial this summer and not yet know what the rates have been for 4.5 years. That's how broken the system is.
One more moment on this topic. We see the proposal from the streaming services, and they claim we're not lowering the rate you already had.
Yeah.
But that's not true. Speak to that.
That's not true. So all the parties have to file what are known as written direct cases, which just basically means our proposal. NSAI and Nmpa have filed a proposal. We think the rates should go up. We've proposed a formula where the top line rate should be at least 20% of the revenue that they take in. We should get at least 40% of whatever record labels and artists get. We should get an amount per play, and we should get an amount per subscriber. And you should look at all 4 of those. Whichever one produces the biggest number is what we should get. They have all made their own individual proposals. And what's interesting about their proposals is that if you just looked at how they describe them, what they would say is, we want the rates to kind of go back to 2017. So forget you had that big increase in 2018. Let's go back to the rate structure from 2017. But it's way worse than that, because within their proposals, they do lots of things that effectively are proposing the lowest rates in history. I'll give you just one example. If our rate is 20% of revenue, which is what we want, or let's say it's 10.5% of revenue, which is what they want, you have to know what you mean by revenue. They have proposed radical changes that would reduce what is called revenue, so that even though they can say, well, it was 10.5% in 2017, and we're proposing 10.5%, or in Amazon's case, they got really cute and said 10.54%. So we're actually proposing an increase. But then they want to change the definition of what revenue means. So as a simple example, if you pay $10 for Spotify today, whatever the percentage of revenue is applied to $10. It doesn't matter if you listen to podcasts or whether you listen to music. The idea is you bought the Spotify subscription because of the availability of music. We get to apply our rate to $10. What they would do is say, no. If half of the time is spent listening to podcasts, then you take $5 off the table. And the revenue pool is only $5, which effectively then cuts the payment in half, even though they get to argue they're both 10.5%. Those are the types of gimmicks and tricks that are included in their proposals that are littered throughout their proposals. And so, yeah, it gets a little bit complicated as you get into the weeds, but I am very confident in describing their proposal as they are proposing the worst rates ever in the music industry. And that's what we're going to go to court about later this year.
Well, one more question. We've received some criticism because we did not choose to address physical rates on CDs and albums. Why did we agree on that decision?
Sure. So the Section 115 rates cover everything that's known as a mechanical reproduction under the law of Section 115. And so thinking about it from a business model perspective, it includes physical product, so vinyl records, CDs, downloads, and it includes interactive streaming, the music services like Apple, Spotify, Amazon. The rate that we get paid for physical product is currently 9.1 cents per copy. It's too low. It's not fair. It's not enough. The decision that we had to make was, do we want to go litigate that rate against the record labels in the same trial where we are going to litigate against the Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify's of the world on the business model that really matters? And we did a lot of analysis about this. And so while I'm not minimizing the importance of physical product to any individual songwriter or artist, the truth of the matter is, let's say we got a 10% increase in that 9.1 cent rate from going to trial. We would spend more on lawyers to go to the trial than we would get from that increase. You read a lot about the vinyl resurgence, and that's great, but it's part of a shrinking pool of physical product that makes up a tiny part of the revenue stream for the industry. And we're looking at the future of 5 years. And so the decision was made that we should focus on the streaming rates where our real fight is, and not get into a war over the 9.1 cents, where we also had a problem. There are lots of controlled composition deductions being taken in physical product, not in digital, because the law outlawed that in 1995, but for physical product. And what that means is we actually had a risk of our rate being cut, because the argument would be made that the marketplace supported a lower rate than 9.1 cent because all of these writers agreed to 3/4 rates. Now, we know they didn't really agree to 3/4 rates. They didn't have a choice. It's not a fair bargain. But the truth of the matter is there were voluntary 3/4 rate deals in place all over the place. So not only was getting a increase potentially not worth the effort, but there was a chance of a cut.
Right.
And so that's why the decision was made to focus on the streaming rates.
And two things I'd point out. We had tried just a few years before, spent $20 million, and the judges left it at 9.1.
We've litigated this before. In CRB1, we litigated the physical rate to try to get it to increase from 9.1 cent, and we lost.
And for those that call for it, I understand that. I understand the emotional component of that, but you might be presiding over a decrease. And there's something else hugely important. We finally got the labels out of these proceedings. And if we went after the physical rate, they would be in and likely have to hammer us on our streaming rate. So it was a thoughtful decision with a lot of layers to it, and I believe a responsible one.
Well, that's a really important point. And not that I like to air our private strategies publicly, but
I, look, we kind of had our hand forced. So
it's important to understand that in this trial, the record labels are not in the trial now because of our settlement. And not only are they not in the trial, they've been supportive of our ask for an increase. For example, Stephen Cooper, the chairman of Warner Music Group, publicly said that he supports our rate proposal. There's a tension there, right? I mean, we believe that an increase for songwriters can come out of the digital services. It doesn't have to come out of lower payments to record labels and artists. But the truth is that when our rates go up, it creates tension on the other side. And so it is a good thing to have record labels out of our trial and supportive of our request for increases, and not have them on the other side of the courtroom with the digital companies, both fighting for lower rates. And that was a big part of the equation.
what do these companies have in common? Peloton, Roblox, TikTok?
They have a lot of things in common, but the one that I think you're probably getting at is that they're part of a much larger group of companies that initially didn't want to pay songwriters and now do. And so one of our big focuses has been on, as the world changes, we want to make sure that we are maximizing the value of songs in every different business model that comes along that uses songs. And while we're never going to go back to the heyday of people buying, physical product, full albums, all songs on an album getting compensated instead of just the hits or the singles. There are all these new applications of music and business models where we have to fight to establish the rules of the road. And so it's just a summary of this. In 2020, 29% of the revenue for the entire industry, almost 1/3, came from sources that originally claimed they didn't have to pay songwriters. and that we fought, we won. They now pay songwriters, and those income streams make up almost a third of our revenue. So then you take that lesson that we've learned, and whether you're talking about social media companies like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, Triller, in-home fitness like Peloton, gaming like Roblox or Twitch streaming, take that now to the concept of Web3, whether it's blockchain technologies, NFTs, virtual reality, the metaverse, the same thing is going to be true. There's enormous opportunity for songwriters in all of these new applications, but we're going to have to fight to make sure that you have a vibrant legal marketplace where the rights of songwriters are respected. And you would hope that companies would launch with that in mind. Often that's not the case.
I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. I'll take one or two. I know you have another commitment. And look, a lot of my friends are making comments, and I'm not going to take comments and turn those into a question. And some we just, Mark, you and I, Mark Montgomery, one of the other smartest people I've ever been in the room. And I challenge your assertions there, Mark, but look, we'll continue to figure out as we move forward together. You're a giant sports fan. You had to have your heart broken back during the playoffs like we all did. What a weekend.
It was. From being from Kansas City, I'm a huge Chiefs fan, and yeah, that was a pretty painful loss. And if you don't mind, Bart, I don't mean to hijack this, but I'm now just reading Mark's comment, and I don't mind addressing it.
Go ahead and take it and look.
I'd like to address it. Look, Mark, I would say that there's a long history where you were right. I think the music industry was slow.
Let me read the question. Let's have
Okay.
the panelists address the music industry's resistance to every technological innovation over the last 100 years to its own detriment, and how they view real transparency going forward, and how incumbents continue to trade on the lack of it.
Yeah. So let's start with the first part of that comment, which is the resistance to technology and innovation. I think you're right. I think that the music industry had a long history of being resistant to that, missing out on opportunity, not capitalizing on the right things. I would say, I think that today you can't make that case. I think that today you find an amazing amount of flexibility, embracing of new technologies, of new business models. Just look at that list I just went through. All of those companies that I just named are business partners now, because instead of just suing them to try to put them out of business, it turned into a partnership. And so I think that while historically that criticism is fair, I do not think you can make that criticism today. And with regard to the transparency point, look at what the songwriters and music publishers created with the MMA. That is the most transparent development in the music industry in history. You now have a database that is public, that is transparent, that is funded 100% by the licensees, not by through a commission off the top of songwriters and publisher royalties. And there's complete transparency with that. And that is something that we just did. And so, yeah, I think also there's a history of not a lot of transparency, but I don't think that that is true with how the modern music publisher approaches the business today.
By the way, if you haven't had him as a guest, I have to rank Mark Montgomery as one of the smartest people I've ever been in the room with too. So I'm going to ask one more question from the audience, then I'll end. I know you have another commitment. It's from Kevin Klager. My question, what is the number one issue you see facing music publishers, I'll go / songwriters, in the age of streaming music?
So, I study the income streams of the industry very closely. Every year, every music publisher turns in their revenue broken down by category, subcategory. I pore over it, I obsess over it. And from that data, I come up with what I project then to be the most important issues and what we should be fighting for. I think that probably number one is the fight we're having right now in the CRB. Interactive streaming makes up about a quarter of the revenue for the entire industry. It's just going to grow. We are significantly underpaid, and we are regulating in a way that we have to fight it out through the legal process instead of the marketplace taking care of the value of songs. So I put that number one. Number two, digital radio. There is a digital radio divide right now that I think most people are not aware of. We are so spoiled by having a history of collecting all of the broadcast radio money. And to be clear, that's dead wrong. Radio should be paying artists and labels. But the history is we collected all of the radio money. But as broadcast radio transitions to digital radio, today, there is a 6-to-1 gap between how digital radio pays record labels and artists versus songwriters and publishers. And that is a business model that for the rest of the world is about 50-50, 1-to-1. This past year, Sound Exchange plus the direct digital radio deals that labels have done, it'll be about $1.25 billion. That is about the same amount that the entirety of ASCAP or the entirety of BMI collected a year. And it comes mostly from 3 sources: XM, Sirius, Pandora, and iHeartRadio. So digital radio is the second area I would say is a huge problem. Third, I would say that the last big social media company to play ball is Twitter. All the other big social media companies now license and pay for music. Twitter doesn't. There's a ton of music on Twitter. That's the next social media company that is going to be in our targets. And then fourth, I would say the Web3 developments. There are companies out there that want to pretend that somehow blockchain technology changes the laws of copyright. It doesn't. And so we are going to have to be very vigilant to make sure that all of these new applications, whether they are NFTs, virtual reality, blockchain-based companies like Audius, they must license and pay for music. And so that would be, you asked for one, that's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Pickleball?
I actually play, so paddle tennis is kind of a version different than pickleball, but paddle tennis is kind of like a cross between tennis and racquetball, I guess, played in the winter outdoors. Yeah, I've got a league match at 9 p.m. tonight. So wish me luck.
Well, last question. I think it was a sanctioned event. You're a hell of a poker player. You even won a tour event, right?
I am an amateur poker player, but I did get very lucky. They opened a casino here in Washington, the MGM National Harbor, and they had a big poker series. And I did win the main event, and by far my largest cash in poker.
Thank you. Thank Tom. Thank the whole audience. This is fantastic. You are one of the smartest people in the room. We're going to recognize, David, your contributions to forwarding the profession next year. There'll be a big announcement about that, but it's my privilege, David, to get to work with you on a daily basis.
Well, I don't want this to end, Bart, with at least just give me one quick chance to say that one of the most meaningful partnerships and friendships that I've had, not just in the last 17 years in this job, but in my life, has been with Bart Herbison. I consider him not just a friend, but really a mentor. Bart is brilliant, and he does it in a way that doesn't draw attention to himself. He deserves so much more credit than he gets. I watched him do things that are impossible to do. He changed the US tax code to benefit songwriters almost single-handedly. You just don't do that. And the MMA would never have passed without Bart being one of the architects of it and quarterbacks of the team. And so that partnership for me is just really, both professionally and personally, is a really meaningful thing. And so to be interviewed by Bart is an honor. It's humbling. And just thank you, Bart, for everything you do.
Tom will tell you what was my one condition to do another one of these. Tom, love you, Dave.
Had to be David Israelite.
I said, if Israelite will do it, I'm in. So.
Well, let me say on behalf of the audience here, because they can't speak beyond the chat, and that is bravo to both of you. As I said in my opening remarks, you guys are the ultimate songmen. Marvel needs to develop a new franchise superhero movie series called The Songmen, starring you two. Seriously, on behalf of the entire industry, especially publishers and songwriters, thank you for your tireless work. Please keep doing it, because obviously we got a long way to go. To the audience, thank you for coming. Thank you for your continued patronage here. We'll be back next week with 2 more rock stars. Ariel Hyatt and Nita Raghuwanshi are appearing in these 2 seats, so come. And Who Knew returns in its live format on the 30th of March at City Winery in Nashville. More details on that to come soon. With that, everyone be nice to each other, get a shot if you haven't gotten one, and hug your loved ones.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.